I suppose my history of engagement on it is, ask my wife, she calls me a waste management freak when we have a row. Because for quite a few years, in an attempt to establish what we could and couldn't recycle, I had a lot of segregated waste in a shed out the back of our house. And I did that for a particular reason, because I actually believed that the Environmental Protection Agency's method of waste characterisation studies was highly ineffective. It was a method that, if you applied it to establishing what people eat, you would go through their faeces to try and establish what they eat, rather than sitting down and watching what they eat. And when I got elected to Roscommon County Council, the first thing I did was I tried to get the position of SPC chair on the environment, and when I did that, I got €5,000 a year tax free. So I says I better bloody well do something for those wages. And what I did was I went out and did a waste characterisation study. I bought myself a set of blue rubber gloves. There was a packet of them, so that I wouldn't be covering my hands in a lot of gunge. And I picked out particular families in the town which I thought were representative of, the Irish society, families, small families, old people, young people with young children, etc. And I bought myself a digital weighing scales, and I went around and I went with my hands, with the gloves on them, through people's residual waste bin, and I put together a waste characterisation study. And from that, I established that actually it would be possible to have a zero waste strategy similar to what they have in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I put this to the council, put it to the Environment SPC, and also applied the study to how we could actually turn the civic amenity sites into places where you could get rid of the vast majority of your waste. Resources, bad name for it. I put this to the executive and the county manager, and the reaction I got was, what the bloody hell has this got to do with you? You're a councillor, mind your own business. I pushed on with it, and I tried to get them to listen, but they did not listen. Unfortunately, but I would say there's a solution to that. You give councillors more power and give them the power to run their own communities, which isn't the case. I try my best to, and for a particular reason, I try to go on the train up and down to Dublin as often as possible. It's easier to use the mobile phone as well, actually, when you're on the train. And from the point of view of my personal life, and this is a personal thing for me, and I'm not asking anyone else to do this, no more than I wouldn't ask anyone to stop cutting turf. I personally am a vegetarian, and I'm a vegetarian because it loses less of the Earth's resources. Check it out. But I try my best to highlight what positive things could be done for the environment. And when I was contacted by Sheila O'Connor from the Turf Cutters and Contractors Association many years ago, and the first thing she says to me is, would you be able to help us on this? So I had a look at it, and I said to myself, okay, is this an area that I want to get into? And actually, after talking to these people and discussing what their solution was, I said, you know what? I think I will get involved with them, because the last thing we need on this whole issue is to bulldoze people and ignore their points of view. And having got involved with them, we put together a plan which the National Parks and Wildlife Service managed to put together nothing in 16 years. And we put together a plan which convinced turf cutters to move out of so-called special areas of conservation and to move to an alternative bog where that was feasible for them. And as a result of it, 98% of the actual area of these so-called SACs would have been preserved forever. And what would have been achieved out of it if the government had went for it was that people in my community would then respect environmentalism, because all they hear is negative stuff about it. You have to leave your bog, you'll be thrown into prison for 3 years if you keep cutting turf, etc. Then they would have been on board. And if they had went along with this plan, Clune Chambers Bog, for example, our local committee were chomping at the bit after we'd moved down the road to turn it into a tourist attraction, looking at the possibility of putting a wooden pathway linked by ropes, which wouldn't do any damage to the habitat there, right across the bog, and it would have brought the community on board. Unfortunately now, because of what I would say fundamentalism, and we want it all and 98% isn't enough, now a lot of turf cutters that you meet will say, you know what, if I see a frog in my bog, I'll stand on it. And why? Well, they'll probably try and stop me cutting turf. So I'd ask, what has it achieved? I don't think it's achieved a lot. Question 1 on environmental law originating from Europe. I always understood that Europe, the European Union, was built on the principle of subsidiarity, and that you wouldn't get stuff being thrown down on top of you, that actually all of these things would come from the community, and then the community would support them. I don't believe in top-down law. I believe in law that starts in the community, empathises with the community, works with the community, and brings the community along, because there seems to be a bit of a philosophy that well, we've got them if we grab them by the throat, but it's a bit like someone jumping out of a tree to catch a lion. Just because you're on its back doesn't mean you've solved the problem. Thank you. I think one thing we've got to do to achieve that is to bring people away around this type of thinking. And to do that, I think we need to convince people that they will have just as good of a quality of life if we go down this road, and that it doesn't have to involve massive pain and misery. And I think that is a message that seems to go out, and I think it's a killer message, because it prevents real progress on this. And also, I think that one way of achieving this is that if someone does have a question about climate change and they don't agree with it, because I take questions from all sides into my office, including the Green Party. I offered Malcolm Noonan the opportunity to put parliamentary questions through my office because they didn't have any other opportunity. But if someone does ask questions that run contrary to the view that I would agree with on climate change, and I think he do, that we deal with them in a way that doesn't just say, you're an idiot, shut up, and anyone who even talks to you is an abominable human being, because that seems to be the strategy, and I think that just turns all people off. It's a bit like going out to Saudi Arabia and trying to promote gay marriage. I think we might start a little bit earlier in the whole chain, and I think that is one way from the point of view of swaying people how you get it to happen. Now, from a practical point of view, I would say one area that needs to be concentrated on is the whole area of how we use our resources, the whole recycling area, and to minimise the amount of waste there is in that area. And that would lead to a reduction in wastage of energy. And in the schools, it's to do with recycling, but I'm sure it applies to reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, is this 3 R's idea. And I think we need to concentrate on the whole idea of reduction. And if you had a situation in this country whereby we aimed for a passive housing standard for all houses, obviously you ain't going to achieve it with them all. You can't make Dunamon Castle passive. I don't think you can in Roscommon, but you strive for that, and that way you achieve a reduction in the amount of carbon dioxide, and at the same time people are nice and cosy and warm in their houses, and that way you bring people around to that type of thinking. I think we need to look at other waste, such as animal slurry, which is currently being spread, pretty much the vast majority of it, raw onto our land. And I think we need to look at anaerobic digestion as a way of creating energy. And also the obvious benefit is that you get a byproduct, which is a really good form of fertilizer, which has fixed nitrogen in it, and it saves people on going out buying bag fertilizer, which has an embodied energy content in it, which causes a problem. So I think we need to look at many different areas of creating energy, including offshore wind turbines, because I think this idea of siting them on the land, people don't like it. Now, they could be wrong or they could be right.
We'll come back to wind turbines later.
Yeah.
We have a question on that. So.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. What I would do to reverse the trend is to point out that actually people like the turf cutters support the idea of the Habitats Directive, but it's the way it is implemented that is a problem. And actually, looking at the latest figures that have come out from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, I'm not making this up, they're there in their peatlands document. It is ironic, just a little bit, that actually the three best so-called SACs when it comes to active raised bog habitat growth are Michael Fitzmaurice's bog, Luke Flanagan's bog, and Jimmy Deenahan's bog. And the worst performers are actually bogs that are in state hands who took them in order to preserve the habitat, and in some of them they're down by 95% since the state took it over. So I think if we want to preserve habitat, the answer here is you work with the community, you don't bulldoze the community, because I appreciate what grows on my bog. I appreciate the bog myrtle. I appreciate the fact that I can bring my children there and show them insect-eating plants, which they're astounded by. But it's hard to get that message across to people as long as it's seen that you have to do something and you have it rammed down your throat without consultation. So what I would do for it is I consult with people and talk with people, because human beings are a little sensitive too, and they don't like being grabbed by the scruff of the neck, ripped out by the roots and told they're leaving. I suppose the first thing that needs to be done by any elected representative, and whether you have the power to change it directly or not, you do have the power to influence people. And I think the first thing that needs to be done on it is the government need to tell people the truth. And the truth on this whole issue of you need these pylons so that you'll get industry into your area. And each area where they're going, they have hung some project on it, when in fact the need for so many of these pylons is because there is a plan to export a massive amount of energy, which would be grand if you had control over the economy and the decisions of the people you are exporting it. But if in the morning they decide to go down the nuclear route, you end up with an awful lot of infrastructure that really isn't worth a damn and damages the country visually. The long and the short of it is, if there are new 400 kV lines needed for local industry and for our own use here, then they should be undergrounded. And when we hear various different multiples of cost as to what it'll cost to put them underground, it seems to change every week depending on what humour the Taoiseach is in. But now we hear that they're talking of compensating people who were near these pylons. So wouldn't it make more sense than, instead of compensating people who were near them, use that money to put it underground, and you would definitely save money in that way. We need an independent study, which they say they're doing at the moment, to establish how much cheaper it would be or how much more expensive it would be. But I think ultimately you got to put them underground, because if you have a landscape as beautiful as we have, the last thing you want, if you can avoid it, and it can be avoided, is to put these things across it. And we hear that, this idea of it being more expensive. They're going to be there for 40 or 50 years. So if they're going to be there for that length of time, spread out the cost over that time, if there is actually an extra cost, because really it's very hard to believe anything out of this government's mouth. In the morning, if they said something was black, you'd immediately have to go and try and establish whether in fact it was white or not. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is people need to be told the truth, and the second thing is we need to establish how many of these we need and to put them underground. In the same way as in the town of Castlerea, where I come from, Like, one thing that definitely doesn't help bring tourists in there is the fact that you have wires going down through the town, dirty looking things on rotten looking poles. If they were all put underground and you had nice light stands there, obviously it would be a boost to the economy, and it would keep everyone happy that, in the case of the pylons, who were worried about the health effects. And I think the precautionary principle needs to be applied. And at the moment, we need to be careful. When I originally heard of fracking and this idea that there was going to be a load of money made out of this natural resource which was under the ground in this area and potentially in parts of Clare, my first thought was, when are we ever going to wake up to the reality that we actually have the finest resources already, and what are we going off looking for new ones? And when I say the finest resource, we have, well, bar where I live, pretty much very good clean water and access to an awful lot of it. And the idea that you would put that under threat in any way is just, it's complete and utter lunacy. And while you made a valid point there, Thomas, that while it doesn't directly affect people all around the country, in the same way as if you're up in 8 foot in the swimming pool in Castlerea and there's a child having a piss in 3 foot, he might be in a different part of the pool, but you're still in the same water. And the problem is, I'm stealing that from the smoking ban argument where they were on about having smoking and non-smoking sections of pubs. It was a bit like the non-pissing and the pissing section of the swimming pool. It isn't feasible. It is too risky to go down this road. And as I said earlier, if it's about keeping our houses warm, passive housing, that's how you go with it there. You do not introduce something that could potentially pollute our water supply. And with climate change and man-made climate change, you have a situation where these ponds where they're going to put this liquid after it comes back up out of the ground are in danger of being flooded by torrential rain and it being washed off into our landscape. And no more than the banks, when they were making lots of money, well, we didn't get any of it. And when they lost loads of money, well, guess what? We got all the debt. The same thing will happen with fracking when it goes belly up, which it will, and when there is an environmental disaster, which there will be if we go down this road, well, guess what? We'll end up with all the losses and we'll end up with all the problems, and some limited company will go, well, there you go, nothing you can do to us. So would I want a strategic environmental assessment or would I demand one? Well, if it helps, but it's a bit like doing a study into the bleeding obvious. You're going to get a bleeding obvious answer. It's not a good idea. Definitely not a good idea. In relation to wind turbines, look, if a neighbourhood wants 500 metre high turbines, all on each and every one of their houses, that's their own business if they want it. And if someone proves to them that they're not viable or anything and they don't listen to that, that is their business. But my main point is the community should decide, not some multinational company or some developer coming into an area trying to make a quick buck. That is not the way to go. And from talking to local communities, they don't want them in their local communities. So you'd have to conclude that the days of on land wind turbines are numbered. Now, I was up in the Inishowen Peninsula there about a week and a half ago, and I said to Jimmy, the fellow who drove me up, I said, well, they won't put them here anyway, because like you couldn't put them in a place that looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. It is that amazing looking. We headed back down through the Inishowen Peninsula, and we actually met someone who told us there was a plan to put them there. Now, that's crazy. Because it means then that you turn absolutely everyone off this technology, whether it's offshore or onshore. And I just think the way the policy has been driven it's damaging to it. One of the big arguments that's put forward by these really caring people in these multinational companies that produce this technology is, because they really do care, as we all know, is that they're worried about all the starving people around the planet. And apparently we won't be able to feed them unless we go down the road of GMOs. Well, I have a suggestion. If they stop producing bombs, bullets and guns and shooting and blowing up people's roads on the way into their towns from their land, if there's people who stop going around creating chaos on the planet, then there is enough food produced on the planet for everyone. I understand there's enough protein produced on the planet through the growing of wheat alone to feed every human on the planet. The problem is, it ain't getting to the people because in many cases there is a problem with distributing it. And let no one tell me that GMO companies are interested in people's health or interested in keeping them fed. Now, we're now heading down this road with the cheer led by the IFA because, you know what, if we're not in there, we'll fall behind. Well, the reality is we'll fall behind if we go down this road because from an economic point of view, we cannot compete with the 1,000 and 1,000 acre farms and the ranchers in other countries. We don't have a country like that. But what we can compete on is selling something that will now be unique, which is GM-free food. And then someone will say to me, oh, but we're already feeding it to the animals. Bloody well, stop feeding it to the animals. That isn't an argument. We need to create Ireland as a GMO-free zone. Now, people will argue back and forward on the health. I actually think that it has serious potential to damage people's health. Some people will say otherwise. I would neuter that argument because the people who will say otherwise, they are interested in money. And from an economic argument, it doesn't make any sense if we have something unique here. We need to keep it unique. And when people come here, they'll come here for that reason. It will help us in many ways if we forget about this. In relation to the trade agreement, I think it's a bit of a dangerous road to go. And Thomas mentioned that the European Commission was they were the ones who were doing the negotiations and that this was the right way to go. Well, I'd prefer if we had people who were elected with a mandate to negotiate things rather than people who do it behind closed doors who have God knows what vested interests in their whose pockets they're in. We don't know about what their real agenda is, and if you want to do a trade deal with anyone, you make sure it's people who have a mandate who agreed that deal. And I think you definitely get a better result out of it. But people who work behind closed doors doing a deal on anything, you would have to be concerned.